Welcome to SealCon. This is the first time I've spoken here. Who am I? My name's Davies. You know that from the talk schedule. I work for a company called Grafton Group PLC. They're a group of companies across Europe. We've got businesses in the UK, Ireland, the Netherlands and Finland. We supply to the building industry. We've got some builders, merchants. Selco is the one that most people know about. Previously did 10 years in the RAF and then in other jobs. I've done school IT. I was an IT manager in a little SMB, but about 30 people. And I've been at Grafton for nearly 11 years now. I do consider myself technical, but all of the skills that we're going to talk about today, I've found that I've had to develop and use in my day-to-day life. I previously built all the stuff that I'm now securing. I don't know whether that's a bad indictment on the way I built it or a change in the way that we look at it. But so I am fairly technical. I was a technical architect. I was a sysadmin. I did manage a group of technical architects who were doing the architecture design, and some of them were doing some implementation as well. Briefly, what I do now, I am a security generalist. I'm in an in-house security team. I'm at the group head office advising people across Europe in the various autonomous IT teams. My particular focus, my particular interests are in infrastructure security, so servers and networks, because that's my background, that's where I come from. Access management, so identity and access management, and vulnerability management. And I'd like to think I know a little bit about incident response. I've been, I'm not going to say that out loud because there's no wood to touch on. Sorry, camera. Touch wood. I've not been involved in a major incident yet, so I don't know how much I know about it, but the little bits that I do, I've learned, as we go on, and then I do a little bit of forensics, but not forensics in the way that you would do it. I do it because it helps me triage and get to where I need to get to. And I thought when I moved over, this is very important. I think this is very important because I see there's lots of FUD, there's lots of misinformation, I think anyway, about information security. And I was quite surprised that they accepted this talk because it was a non-technical talk. And talking, as I've gone around and spoken to people, it is something that I think still kind of promoting quite well. There are not technical and non-technical roles in information security. You don't have to have come from a technical IT background to work in our industry. They're all skilled roles. So what we're going to talk about today aren't things you've got to go and learn, are things that you've got to be able to do, but they're all skills that you've got to be able to do. We'll get into the individual ones later, but just because you're not building service doesn't mean you're not in a skilled job. And I think sometimes that gets missed. And what we discuss, I don't think is specific to any particular role. I think they cross all roles, whether you're in GRC, whether you're in incident response, whether you're a pen tester, whether you're a red teamer. Some of what we talk to today will be relevant. This is not aimed at you. It was a reminder to me when I go into meetings. I'm very bad. I like the sound of my own voice, probably why I like speaking, but I put this in as a reminder to me because I'm really bad at interrupting people when we're in meetings or when we're in talks. And I acknowledge that I'm incredibly bad at it. So the first thing I'll talk about is listening. You wouldn't perhaps think that listening is a skill, but actually listening well is a skill that needs to be practiced and developed. There are some things that you can do to get into a better place to make listening easier and to make it more effective. Active listening, or attentive listening, is focusing on the speaker and not on anything else. And that's become harder and harder and harder because now we're holding meetings on Teams or Zoom. You've got Teams open, you're talking and you're in your meeting on Teams, but everybody ignores the fact that you're presenting or you're in a meeting or you're on Do Not Disturb. They're still firing messages over to you. We've got email, we've got phones, we've got lots and lots of communication channels, and removing those distractions, working hard to eliminate those distractions is getting harder and harder to do. The other thing that's key for me, and this talk is about the things that I found in my journey, is that I actually am very bad at letting speakers finish. I don't know whether it's OCD or ADHD, or if they say something wrong, technically wrong, I can't let them get past it. It drives me mad. And I find that I interrupt them and try and correct them. And you'll see later in the talk that that has another impact elsewhere. Responsive listening is making sure that they know you're listening. So it's quite easy to do in an environment like this. You're all looking at me. You're all obviously paying attention. Nobody's on the phone. Nobody is doing anything else. When you're on Teams, that's much harder to do. When you're on Zoom, that's much harder to do. But giving cues, giving non-verbal cues, nodding your head, or just generally looking at the person that's speaking, they're all non-verbal cues. Some of the verbal cues would be, yeah, yeah, understand. Just making sure that people know that you're paying attention and that you're... Watch a news journalist when they're interviewing somebody, and you'll see what they do. They're nodding, they're using very short sounds to indicate that they're paying attention. I'm not sure that they always are paying attention, but they're trying to pretend at least. And if you combine both of those, you get to active listening, responsive active listening. And active listening is the culmination of what you're trying to get to. You've eliminated all of the distractions. You're being very responsive. You're actively listening. The key things, I think, are the last 2 or 3 in this list, because you avoid invalidating the speaker's comments. I have to say that I'm really bad. Oh, I said it earlier on. I'm really bad. And if somebody says something that's wrong, I interrupt them. And I can't let them get past it. It drives me nuts. And I will stop them and say, I'm sorry, I don't think that's right. But immediately I'm invalidating what they have said or what they think is the problem. And there needs to be 2 things there. 1, I've interrupted them. I've not let them finish. And 2, I've started to invalidate what they're talking about. And I think that I need to get better at not doing that. But it's something that I think is quite common, I find, in these kind of talks and meetings where we're talking particularly with non-technical people. I spend a lot of time talking to marketing people about websites and website design and web apps that they want to employ. Don't give personal opinions. You can give facts. You can tell them that that's factually wrong, or you can explain to them that there's an error in their thinking in an appropriate manner. But they try to avoid giving personal opinions and say, I think that you shouldn't be doing it that way. There needs to be a reason why you shouldn't be doing it that way. Otherwise, you're just you're negating what they want to do and what they think and how they've come to this conclusion. That's just the source of this. So when the slides are released, you'll be able to go and check the sources and read a bit more detail about how to become a good listener. Critical thinking. I remember my daughter doing critical thinking as an AS level, and it's kind of like, how can you do an AS level on thinking, for goodness sake? And I guess didn't really understand it at the time, but now I've looked into it more and considered it more. Actually, we do a lot of this all the time. So according to criticalthinking.org, this is the definition that they use for critical thinking. Actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered. Now, if you are doing security design, and I do a lot of that, then you are having to deal with information that's presented to you in a very short meeting, and you've got a very short period of time to be able to assimilate that information, to make decisions on that information, and to then advise on a route forward with that information. And that requires you to be able to think critically. Now, if you're all experienced information security professionals and experienced security architects or experienced people who are doing that kind of work, you probably do this without even realizing you're doing it. If you are new to the industry or you're thinking of coming into the industry, this is something that you need to practice. You need to be able to take complex information a lot of complex information thrown at you in a very short space of time, maybe just an hour or even shorter, and then be able to make decisions on that could impact the rest of that, the rest of that project or the rest of that process. Communication. Once you've done your critical, you've done your listening, you've assimilated all that information, you've got your thinking cap on, as it were, you've got to be able to express your thoughts. You're going to be dealing with non-IT people. One of the things that really bugs me is that we've got this language that's specific to us, and we don't consider anybody outside of this environment. You know, as there's an RCE and there's a new vulnerability, it's an RCE. What the hell does an RCE mean? They are all unfamiliar with our specific language. I talk to IT people and they don't know half of what I'm talking about because they'll say, well, I don't know what you mean here. They're confident enough or know me well enough to ask, but if I'm talking to the head of marketing that I've perhaps only met once or twice before, they might not. They might not have the confidence to say, I don't understand what you're saying. Or if they do say that, then I've got to have the ability to translate that into a form that they understand. I've got to be able to explain it to them. Cross-site scripting is a great one. This is, I think, the next slide, actually. Cross-site scripting is a great one because I've never found anybody who can explain cross-site scripting in a non-technical way that a marketing person would understand. All of our websites are designed, built, run, organized. They're not built because they're built by devs, but the concept all comes from marketing, and marketing generally are the project owners, and they're the ones that have to understand why it can't go live because there's a vulnerability on it. They're the ones that have to. You have to convince that they can't turn it on. And you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to do that in written and verbal communications. And so in meetings, obviously, we're just talking about verbal comms. We're talking about sitting on Teams and explaining something. But also in written communications, this was the output of a pen test that we did on a new website. And it was sent. So I've just literally extracted the table from page 2. Without any of the other detail, but this was the table that was sent, and this was sent to the person who owned the website. We commissioned the pen test, so the security team commissioned the pen test. We commissioned it with a security partner that we use regularly, but they sent the report to the marketing lady. There's 30 people in this business. There's one lady that does all of their marketing, and they sent this to her, and she was like, "I don't know what any of this means." And so somewhere along the line, you've got to be able to translate this InfoSec speak into English. And I mean, when I originally wrote this talk, I was going to go and talk to some students at a university. And at this point, I was going to ask them to explain cross-site scripting to me without using any InfoSec speak. I'm not going to do that today. I'm not going to put you on the spot. But it's not something we think about. What's the risk? So we've got some old and insecure ciphers, but so what? It's like, so what? You've got to be able to explain this to people who have no idea what we're talking about. And I don't think I was ready for. I don't think I was ready for the level of specialist language that we use. When you get to this, you've done your listening, you've done your critical thinking, you've done your analysis, you've got the information to hand, there are always going to be problems to solve. And not all of them will be easy. Not all of them will be straightforward. Not all of them will have a direct path to resolution. You will need to think laterally. You will need to look outside the box. But you will need to look at stuff. Oh, I didn't start the timer. You will need to look at stuff from different angles and try and find resolutions that maybe aren't obvious. And to do that, you've probably got to be able to negotiate your way through it. And negotiation, you can do week-long courses in negotiation, so I'm not going to go into how to negotiate. But you will need to be able to negotiate with people. You will need to be able to say to people, we need to get to point A, we need to get to point B. How do we get there? And there will always be conflicts. There will be conflicts between what you want to achieve and what the business wants to achieve. There will be conflicts between operability and security. One of the big complaints, I was in one of our businesses in Dublin recently, and the new thing was that the new excuse for not doing anything was because group don't let me do it. The security processes and procedures that we've now put in place, where we've restricted access to certain things that they previously had access to, you could argue they probably shouldn't have had access to them in the first place, but now we've stopped that from happening. We've made it more difficult in some respects, but we've also secured it. And there is a balance between security and operability, but you need to be able to negotiate these, because they still got targets to meet. They still got to sell stuff. They still got to market stuff. They still got to make a profit. And if you stop them from doing it, then, or you make it difficult for them to do it, they're less likely to be on your side when you're doing it. And part of negotiating is adapting to their environment and adapting to their needs. So one of the worst phrases in the world is, well, we've always done it that way. Like, it's why are you doing that? Why is that? Well, we've always done it that way. Why have you always done it that way? Well, that's the way I was shown how to do it. Have you ever thought about doing it a different way? Well, no, really. We've always done it that way. Try to be flexible. Try to think about different ways of doing it. Try to understand their point of view and put yourself in their shoes almost, and then look at whether or not there are other ways of dealing with the same problem. Be pragmatic. Be pragmatic, but be considerate. This last line, every step forward is a step in the right direction. When I started in security about 4 or 5 years ago, I had this kind of idea in my head that once we decided to do something, you had to do it. Like, you're my IT teams, or you're my businesses. If we've decided that this is the new policy, you have to adopt that policy and you have to do it now. And that's not the case. Sometimes, yes, you do need to be working towards that policy. Yes, you do need to be working to the standards that we've set. You've all agreed to those standards. It's not something that we impose on you. We do it through collaboration. But you won't always get it done at the same pace by everybody. Every step forward is a step in the right direction. Small changes can have a big impact. Don't try and boil the ocean. Maybe a bit of a cliche, but that's not my phrase. I stole that from Ed Tucker. I don't know if you know Ed Tucker. I was at B-Sides Liverpool. We were drinking outside the pub before, on the Friday night before, and he gave me that. And it stuck with me because it really helped me get past this thing that you've got to implement this thing, and you've got to implement it all, and you've got to implement it now. Because if you can implement a part of that thing today and another part next week and another part the week after, I'm still getting to the same endpoint eventually. And I'd rather get to that endpoint than you just keep saying, no, I can't do it, no, I can't do it, no, I can't do it. So I thought that was a really interesting way of viewing the world, to be fair. And Ed does have some unusual views of what we do in our industry, which actually are quite interesting to to listen to. The other thing that I think is quite key is understanding the business. I see a lot of people who don't understand how business works. They've worked in IT all their life. They've never set foot. They've never been in a commercial meeting. They've never talked about budgets or money or anything. One of the things I think that helped me the most was in this small business that I worked in. It was 30 or 40 people, but I was on the senior management team, and I was at the senior management meetings every month, and I got to listen. I was bored to tears for a lot of it, but I got to listen to all of the financials. I've got to listen to all of the sales targets. I got to listen to all of the stock management and stock problems that we were having and the supply chain management problems we were having. But it also gave me a different perspective on how I might go and ask for something in that meeting. Because if they're all having problems meeting their targets and we're not giving them money to improve, the likelihood of them giving me money to make changes in IT at the time were even less likely, unless I could demonstrate there was going to be a benefit to them. If I could go to them and say, well, if you give me this money for this thing, it will make this improvement to your sales targets, or it will help you to deal with this thing more efficiently, then I was more likely to get the money that I wanted. So understanding the business, presenting your data, what's the current state, what's the target state, and what improvements will this do? How can we make the biggest improvements in the shortest period of time? What are the easy wins? But doing that in a business context, not doing that in a purely security context. If we just go and say, well, we're being fished, lots of fishing, we need to stop fishing. Why? What's the risk? Most people don't understand the risk. You speak to employees. I work in an industry that supplies construction. If you go and talk to somebody in our stores, an old managing director that we had said, we sell bricks and sand. That's what we do as a business. We sell a bit more than bricks and sand. But her interpretation of our business was, we sell bricks and sand. And if you go and talk to people in the business and say, what about fishing? They don't understand what the risks are. They've got no idea. And that feeds up the food chain until you get, unless you've got a really informed C-suite, most of the people have come through, certainly in my business, the regional managers, the branch managers, the regional directors, they actually, a lot of them don't understand the risks of phishing. They just see, you click on the link, they steal your credentials, so what? Change your password, it's all done. Because that's the way it's been promoted. That's the way their mind has picked that up. So present it in a way that explains to the business what the risks are, rather than expecting them to already know it. And this, I think, is another thing that really helps me. I try to get very involved in budgets. Now, I'm a generalist security advisor, consultant, whatever you want to call it. I don't manage any budgets at all. If we are going to look at new products, if we're going to look at a new solution, understanding what the budget is or what their expectations of the budget is really helpful, because then I can also have those conversations with the vendors. We can get to a place that is, they're not going to say no outright because it's already too expensive. Your first quote is £250,000 and your budget is £100,000. You might find that they just write it off without even talking about it or thinking about it. It could be the best product ever. If you go to the vendor and say, I've got this much money, how much of your product can I buy? What can I do? What can I use? Can you get the cost of your product down to fit this budget or anywhere near close? Two things there. One, you could be saving yourself an awful lot of time, because if they say no, well, you just move on to the next one. And if they say yes, you could end up with the best-in-class product at the price you can afford. And then you can go direct to the business and say, well, look, I've done this review, I've done this proof of value, I've done this RFP, this is where we've got to with it, these are the top two, top three, this is what their quotes are, and I prefer this one, and it does fit in the budget, or it's just outside the budget. I don't know if you can stretch to that. But you've done all of that work in advance. You make it much harder for them to say no. I literally just done that. So I can't talk about what we're doing, but I've literally just done that with a vendor and a solution, and we literally signed on Friday. And the values are there or thereabouts. So shows what you can do if you're willing to understand a little bit about budgetary requirements and budgetary things. You may, particularly, no, I don't want to say that because that's not. So you may come across project management. You may find that you have to bring something in or get something done. Project management isn't just about building something new. It's about making sure that you reach the end state that you want to reach. That can be anything, to be fair. That can be bringing 1,000 new people into your business. You're going to manage that. There is a level of management to do that. It could be building an entirely new vulnerability management program or an entirely new identity access management program. They're all things that would need some level of management. So project management isn't necessarily building something new or installing something new. It can be adapted to any process that requires a number of steps and a series of steps and input from everybody. And you can do this really basically. You don't need to go and do Prince 2. If you don't need full-on project management to manage like a multi-million-pound infrastructure project, it is quite easy to do. Easy is not the right word, but it's quite straightforward to do if you take the right steps. Plan the expected route to completion. Plan the resources you need to follow that route. Try to keep everybody on that route, which I don't know about you, but we always call it herding cats because it's very difficult to do. They've got all of their own things to do, and you're trying to get them to do your thing. It can be. I would talk to people on Teams, and they'll say, "Yeah, I'll do that. I'll get that done. I'll definitely get that done. Be done by the end of the week." And then the next week you speak to them, and they say, "Oh no, sorry, I didn't get it done. I got pulled off on something else." It's easier if you're in the room with them, and you can kind of like, I've got a team behind me that deliver a load of stuff, and every day I can say, "Have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? Have you done it yet?" But if you're doing it on Teams with a remote business in the Netherlands or Finland, you've also got a language barrier. It can be much harder. And you need to be, with that in mind, you need to be able to manage their objections and their procrastination, because that will come, or almost certainly that will come. And there are various ways you can do that. They don't want to do it because it makes their life harder. Already spoken about some of that. They don't have the resources, quite a common one. Or there's only two of us, can't do it. We've got so much work to do. Sometimes that's genuine. One of our businesses rolled out a brand new ERP system, and they are swamped. They are trying to roll out a system to every branch, and that is it's all consuming at the minute, and we have to understand that. Another business is doing an infrastructure refresh project, and that is, but they're merging two companies together to operate as one in the Netherlands, and then do an infrastructure refresh project all at the same time, and that is taking up a lot of their time. And we keep saying, do this, do this, do this. Please, can you do this? Please, can you do this for us? And they just don't have the resources. They don't have the human resources to deal with it. But there are ways around that. You can go back to the negotiation bit. You can negotiate that it gets done in a certain period of time. It doesn't have to be done today, but could you get it done by the end of the month or the end of next month? At least you can keep that on track then, because you've planned the route to completion. They've agreed to give you the resources. And as long as you have regular meetings to say, is this going to happen? Is this going to happen? Is this still, are there any new objections? Are there any new problems? Is your other project become delayed or busy? All of that fits in really well. Well, when you're doing it, and I don't know whether I've put this in the right place, because actually the example I give really goes back to the communication slide. But I wanted to share this because this was really frustrating for me. When you're writing any of these things or dealing with any of these things, attention to detail is really important. I'm not a very detail-focused person. I much prefer doing strategy and kind of wide-ranging solution architecture, because somebody else can do the detail, and they're much better at it than I am. But we recently, a few years ago now, we had a pen test done, and the report came out. And I don't know if you can see this on the screen. I've blown this screenshot up so much it's gone very blurry. But the IKE scan that they did, the IP address started with 80.68. And then in the report itself, it reported an affected component that started 193.95. And then when I gave this to the IT teams, and they were like, well, we don't have anything on 193.95. So what's affected? It negated that whole section of the report. Now, that had gone through QA as well, because the pen tester had done the report, and then it had gone through their QA, and then it had come out. So attention to a little mistake by copying in the wrong IP address and the affected components. And it turned out that he'd done a number of tests for us, and he'd taken it from the wrong data set. But we did get to the end. We did get to the right result in the end. But that could have negated a whole section of the report, or it could have left a vulnerability open that nobody could find. So whatever you're doing when you're communicating and doing any of this, attention to detail is quite important. And it's something that, for me, I've had to learn, because I like working in big blobs, not tiny dots. So I've always worked in kind of, I want to say solutions, but it's maybe not the right word. But I've always worked in the big picture and said, well, what we need to do is get this data from here to here. How do we do that? And then we draw big boxes, and then somebody else fills in what we're using in those big boxes. And so I've really had to learn to be more attentive to detail. Blimey, are we there already? So when I was doing this, I did ask. I kind of suggested what I was going to include, and I asked other people to maybe. Had I missed anything? And so these suggestions came from the kind of wider community. And quite a few people actually suggested psychology, that understanding human behavior will help you. If you know how to deal with people, if you know how people think, then you get a better end result. And that's shown with social engineering. Social engineering in a positive sense. So Jenny Redcliffe, if you know Jenny Redcliffe, the people hacker, she did a Darknet Diaries podcast. She's got her own podcast as well. I'm sorry, Jenny, if you're watching this, I will advertise your podcast as well. So she's got her own podcast called The Human Hacker. But she did an episode on Darknet Diaries, and as part of that, she actually talks about negotiation and how she uses her social engineering skills in negotiations to get the result that the customer wants. Because she can manipulate people, she understands people so well, and she understands how people respond to things. It gets really dark in places, and I don't for a minute propose that you go out and find your CEO's deepest, darkest secret and threaten him with it if he doesn't give you the money to buy your thing with. But the principle that you can actually use some of the social engineering skills and abilities is quite useful, and some of that is human psychology. Years and years and years ago, I did a basic counselling course. I'd had a series of counselling for various reasons, and I found it really helpful, and I wanted to be able to help others, really. And what it did do was it helped me with my responsive listening, with my active listening. I haven't used it for a long time, which is why I think I've kind of fallen away from it a bit. But the other thing it does is it makes people identify their own challenges rather than, or are they challenges? So the way that the skills are taught, if you've ever being in a counselling session, they're not telling you what's wrong with you. They're getting you to work it out for yourself. They're not telling you how to fix it. They're getting you to find your own solutions to it. And actually, I found that quite useful in, particularly back in negotiating again. When people say, I can't do it. Okay, why can't you do it? What's the problem? Well, I can't do it because. Okay, so if that's the because, what's the solution? Where do we go from there? How do we get around it? What could you do? What could you do to make that better? And these are the kind of open questions that you learn to do. I learned these things as a skill in counselling. I mean, I was doing it for human counselling to help people, but I found that I can use the same set of questions, the same set of skills in helping people. The minute they say, I can't do it, why can't you do it? Because we're the same. I was going through some personal trauma, and I would say, I can't do it. I can't do that thing. And the counsellor would just say, why can't you do it? And so I just found that those things help. And if you can get people to identify their own challenges or find solutions to their own challenges, then they're more likely to actually crack on and do the thing that you want them to do because they've resolved the problem in their own head. If you tell them to do something or you find the solution for them, in their minds, they've still got the problem. You just trying to work around it. I thought this was quite an important one, actually. One person said this. I don't know if any of you know Stu Colson. This was Stu's suggestion. Be nice. Be empathetic. Remember that they might be having a bad day. They might have had a row with their partner when they left home. They might have got out of bed the wrong side. The coffee machine might not be working. The dog might have left them a parcel on a kitchen floor. Anything could have happened to start the day off badly, and it's got worse as the day has gone on. And so be kind to people. Don't try not to get frustrated with them just because you're not getting your own way, or maybe they've been a bit short and a bit curt and shirty. I said to somebody a long time ago, a really nice man, and I said to him, do you know what? You're just too kind. People take advantage of you. You're just too kind. And his response to me was, how can you be too kind? And I was like, well, and that was his outlook on life. He had a really rough start in life. He was a product of thalidomide in the 60s, and he'd had a pretty rough life, to be fair. But his output on it in his 50s was, how can you be too kind? So that's worth thinking about. And humour. I think perhaps I misplace my humour at times. I don't always use it at the right place and target it at the right people, but it does make people laugh. It lightens the mood. I am known for maybe saying things that I shouldn't say to people I shouldn't say them to. But hey, I'm still in a job. So we do live in a doom and gloom industry. The work we do is never finished. We're never protected. We've never done enough. There's never enough money. There's never enough time. There's never enough tech. There's never enough of anything. And we live in an industry that says, despite doing all of this, assume you've been breached. It's like, how much doom and gloom could you fit into one job? So try and smile. Try and be happy. Try and lighten the mood a bit. Try and just have a laugh. You can have a laugh with colleagues, but try and have a just when you're talking to other people, don't be all doom and gloom about it. I don't know, can you see that all right? I thought this was really key from Andy. And polite, and he was really nice because he didn't swear in it. But I thought this was key. This was something that he was told, and he repeated it to me when I asked him. We get paid to write reports. The hacking is free. So I know I said at the beginning that there are technical and non-technical roles, but the point is that even if you're in a technical job, Even if you're in solutions architecture, if you're in security engineering, if you're incident response, penetration testing and red teaming, you're getting paid to tell the customer something. Give them a design, give them a forensics report, deal with some incident response and feed back the state of the incident to them. What they're paying for is your output. You get that output by doing the other stuff. And so one of the most common ways of doing this writing of reports or feeding back of information is Microsoft Office. So whether you're using Excel, whether you're using Word, or whether you're using PowerPoint, it's a tool that most people will come across at some point in time. And it's remarkable how many people don't know how to use it or only use a tiny little bit of it. So Excel can be really useful if you want to review logs or review reports, but review lists, really. So if you're running vulnerability management, for instance, you often get a list of vulnerabilities, much easier to read often in Excel. And if you can get into things like Power Query, which is a free kind of query tool, you can manage that and you can replay that every month. Every time you get a report, you can be redoing that automatically rather than... I did see one guy a few years ago now, a salesman who had Excel open, and he put the name of the product in one column, he put the price of each item in the next column, and then he got a calculator out and he calculated 10 of this thing, and then he put the total price in the third column. And then when he'd finished doing that, at the bottom, he sat with the calculator and he added up all of the totals on a calculator and then typed that number into the Excel spreadsheet. I mean, I don't think that we're quite at that point. So I'm sorry if I've just embarrassed you, because that's what you do. But they're useful tools. They're useful things to learn. And if you set them up properly, if you set up, in Word and you can, if you get to use them, don't shy away from them, because you will need to use them. And hopefully you'll be here using PowerPoint, giving a presentation of your own one day, if not here, somewhere else. I think, personal view, but I think Excel is potentially the most widely used application in information security and cybersecurity. Anybody disagree with that?
Widely hated as well.
I didn't say it was liked. Sorry, did you?
Well, I just wondered whether you mean Excel or do you mean spreadsheets?
Well,
because obviously there's a wide range of open source applications.
I think for me, I mean Excel, because I can count on the fingers of one hand how many people I know that don't use Windows and don't use Microsoft Office. And I've been doing it for 43. So I worked on my first computer in 1980. So 43 years, and I can count on the fingers of one hand how many people. I tried using Linux. I was absolutely adamant that I did it with Mac OS a few years ago. I bought a Mac Mini. I taught myself Mac OS with the idea that I could also learn a bit of Linux while I was there. And I got bored with Mac. Then they went off to Apple Silicon, and my Mac Mini didn't work anymore. And so I thought, right, I'm going to put Linux on my primary desktop. And none of my hardware worked. None of it. I bought a new keyboard. None of it worked. So I went back to Windows. So I think for me, you are right. Spreadsheets probably are the most widely used thing in cybersecurity. But Excel, I think, is...
Saying that, I tried using Google Sheets. I was like, no, going back to Excel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm using a MacBook. I've got an Apple MacBook here. An old one, but I've got an Apple MacBook, and I tried using the Apple one with numbers, is it? No. I can't use numbers, I can't use Google Sheets, I always go back to Excel. And the wizardry I can do in Excel, because I've been using it for, since Office version 2. Anybody remember Office version 2? Somebody waved at me, so I don't feel quite so bad. Dealing with drama. You will always, wherever you are, have to deal with InfoSec drama. If you're on Twitter, there's loads of it, but it's not really that important. Good luck, Brian. I'll be in a bit. I might be a few minutes late in, but I'll be in. There will always be infosec drama. The Twitter drama is not to worry about, but something happens at work. It's always worse than it. It's always worse than it actually is, and until it isn't, I suppose. But there will always be drama to deal with. It will always be your fault. Just try and be the calming influence in a sea of rage. That's all I can suggest. It is actually a skill to walk into a room where everybody is in mad panic and you have to be a calm duck floating across the water, and calming everybody down. But if you can do it, and I'm sorry, gents, I don't mean to be sexist, but I find ladies are much better at this than men. But if you can do it, it is worth doing. I find that I wind people up because I don't get worked up about it. And then they're like, Ian, you're not taking this seriously. So, I am taking it seriously. I'm just not getting worked up about it. So, wrapping up, in short, try to understand people. I think information security is a people business. I don't think it's a technology business, and I'll explain why. The tech is there to protect people and mitigate human error. Now, if you think about that, we talk about information security. We're there to protect the information, but why are we protecting the information? Ultimately, who gets hurt if what gets hurt if that information gets out? The company gets hurt, or people get hurt. If the company gets hurt, people lose their jobs. If your personal information gets hurt, you might get hurt. People might rob your bank, or they might steal your credit card details, or they might take money off you. They might do something more nefarious. But ultimately, the last thing that gets damaged by anything that goes wrong in our industry is likely to be people. And what we're trying to protect is their livelihoods and their mental health and their ability to function as human beings. And we sometimes forget that, I think. We sometimes forget that, actually, we get consumed by the commercial side of keeping the business running, and we forget why we want to do that or why we should be doing that. If the business fails, people lose their jobs. If people lose their jobs, they can't pay their bills. If they can't pay their bills, they might lose their house. And so we're protecting people ultimately. And you can do that by listening. So listen actively, communicate thoroughly, think critically, negotiate thoughtfully, and probably you'll be able to solve some problems along the way. Oh, that's in there twice. I don't know why. If you want to keep in touch, this is how you can keep in touch with me. I have to say my blog is about out of date. I had these grand ideas of keeping a blog and writing on it regularly, and I started a couple of tutorials, and then it's all fell by the wayside. Work got in the way. COVID got in the way. Work got in the way, and I didn't really go any further. But we've got about 10 minutes left if anybody's got any questions. If you disagree with any of it, or you agree with any of it, I'd really like to hear your feedback. So I'm here all day. I'm at the party later. If you do find me, if you do see me, if you've got anything to say, please come and tell me, because this is my view of my world and what I've found, moving from a technical role to a non-technical role. So do come and let me know. Thank you very much.